A billionaire spots a homeless girl on the icy street, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Something about her stops him dead in his tracks. Then, with a trembling voice, she looks up and whispers one word. "Daddy?" And he freezes. Who is she? A stranger? A con? Or the one secret he's been running from his whole life? As her story unfolds, his perfect world begins to crack, revealing a past he's desperate to forget, and a truth he can no longer deny. What happens when the life he built collides with the one he abandoned? Can redemption be enough to heal what's been broken? Or will this discovery destroy everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the shimmer of designer gowns. Nicholas Hale stood near the bar, his perfectly tailored tuxedo as cold and rigid as his expression. He checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes, barely listening to the passionate speech about homeless youth being delivered from the podium. "You could at least pretend to care, Nicholas." His sister Evelyn's voice cut through his thoughts. She approached with calculated grace, her emerald dress matching the sharp glint in her eyes. Nicholas took a sip of his scotch. "I wrote the check, didn't I?" "Just like Father taught us, throw money at problems and walk away." Evelyn's words carried the weight of old wounds, though he at least had the decency to stay for the entire presentation. "Don't start, Evelyn." Nicholas's jaw tightened. "We both know these events are just tax write-offs wrapped in fancy bows." "Is that what you really believe?" Evelyn shook her head, disappointment evident in her features. "Sometimes I wonder what happened to that little boy who used to give his allowance to every stray cat he found." Nicholas turned away from her knowing look. The memory stung more than he cared to admit. Without another word, he placed his empty glass on a passing waiter's tray and headed for the exit. The night air bit through his expensive wool coat as he strode to his waiting Bentley. The leather seats welcomed him with familiar luxury, but tonight they felt hollow, much like the speeches he'd endured all evening. Traffic crawled through downtown, brake lights reflecting off the patches of ice on the road. Nicholas drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, irritation mounting with each passing minute. That's when he saw her. A small figure huddled on the sidewalk, pressed against a building's brick wall. The streetlight cast enough glow for him to make out her features. A young girl, no more than 8, with tangled dark hair and clothes too thin for the winter night. In her arms she clutched a teddy bear missing an eye, its stuffing poking through worn seams. Nicholas tried to look away, but something about her grabbed hold of his heart and wouldn't let go. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and she huddled closer to her bear as people walked past, none sparing her a glance. Before he could think it through, Nicholas pulled his car to the curb. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped out into the cold, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who prided himself on his composure. "Are you hungry?" he asked, approaching carefully. "I can get you something warm to eat." The girl lifted her head slowly, revealing eyes that seemed to hold both fear and hope. Her lips quivered, but not from the cold. In a voice barely above a whisper, she uttered a single word that stopped Nicholas's heart. "Daddy?" Nicholas stood frozen, the word echoing in his mind like a bell in an empty church. The teddy bear slipped slightly in the girl's grasp as she stared up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and desperate hope. Nicholas's throat felt tight as he knelt down beside her, snow seeping through his expensive wool pants. The girl's eyes, so full of hope moments ago, began to dim with recognition that he wasn't who she thought he was. "I'm sorry," she whispered, clutching her teddy bear closer. "You look like him. My daddy, I mean. He used to wear suits like that too." Nicholas felt something crack inside his carefully constructed walls. "What happened to your father?" he asked softly, trying to keep his voice gentle and steady. The girl, who would later introduce herself as Savannah, blinked back tears. "He was driving home from work 2 years ago. It was raining really hard." Her small fingers traced patterns on her teddy bear's worn fur. "Mommy said his car slid on the wet road." Nicholas nodded, encouraging her to continue. Around them, the city bustled with evening traffic, but he remained focused solely on the small figure before him. After Daddy died, Mommy started acting different. Savannah's voice grew quieter. She would talk to people who weren't there. Sometimes she forgot to make dinner, or she'd cry all day long. Her eyes took on a wisdom far beyond her years. The doctors said her mind was sick, so they took her to a special hospital to help her get better. "And there was no one to take care of you?" Nicholas asked, his heart pounding against his ribs. The thought of this child alone on the streets made him feel physically ill. Savannah shook her head. "I stayed with Mrs. Peterson next door for a while, but then she got really sick too and had to go live with her daughter." She hugged her teddy bear tighter. "I didn't want to go to foster care. Mommy promised she'd come back for me." Nicholas noticed her shivering despite her attempts to hide it. Her thin jacket was nowhere near warm enough for the freezing temperature. Without hesitation, he removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It engulfed her small frame like a blanket. "Listen," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I know a place where you can get warm and have something to eat. Would you like that?" Savannah's eyes darted between Nicholas and the street, weighing her options. Trust warred with caution on her young face. "I'm not supposed to go with strangers," she said, though her voice wavered with longing at the mention of warmth and food. "You're very smart to be careful," Nicholas replied, surprising himself with his patience. "My name is Nicholas Hale, and you're right. I'm a stranger now, but I promise you'll be safe. We can go somewhere public with lots of people around." Savannah studied him for a long moment, her eyes seeming to peer straight into his soul. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Okay, Mr. Hale." She stood up slowly, still wrapped in his oversized coat. "But Theodore comes too," she added, holding up her teddy bear. "Of course," Nicholas said, managing a small smile. "Theodore is absolutely welcome." Together, they walked toward his car, Savannah's small hand clutching her teddy bear while the other held onto the edge of Nicholas's suit jacket. The snow had started falling again, soft flakes catching in her dark hair like tiny stars. Savannah stood in the center of Nicholas's penthouse, her eyes wide with wonder. The spacious living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, made her seem even smaller than she was. Her worn shoes left tiny wet marks on the polished marble floor, and she hugged Theodore tighter, as if afraid to touch anything. "Maggie?" Nicholas called out, and his housekeeper appeared promptly from the kitchen. Maggie Harper, a warm-faced woman in her 50s, took one look at the small girl, and her expression softened immediately. "Oh, you poor dear," Maggie said, her voice gentle. She shot Nicholas a questioning look, but he shook his head slightly, indicating they'd talk later. "Maggie, could you prepare the guest room for Savannah? And maybe find something warm for her to wear?" Nicholas asked, his usual commanding tone notably absent. "Of course, Mr. Hale." Maggie smiled at Savannah. "Would you like a hot chocolate while we wait for dinner, sweetheart?" Savannah nodded shyly, her fingers playing with Theodore's worn ear. "Yes, please," she whispered. Over dinner, a simple meal of chicken soup and fresh bread that Maggie had quickly prepared, Nicholas watched Savannah eat carefully, trying not to spill anything on the clean clothes Maggie had found for her. The oversized t-shirt and leggings made her look even more vulnerable. "This is really good," Savannah said between spoonfuls. "My daddy used to make soup too, but not as good as this." She paused, stirring her spoon thoughtfully. "He worked at Hale Industries, you know. That's why your name sounds familiar." Nicholas nearly choked on his water. He worked for my company?" "Uh-huh. He was really proud of his job." Savannah's face lit up with the memory. "He said he was helping build important things that would make people's lives better." The words hit Nicholas like a physical blow. He remembered the massive layoffs 2 years ago when he'd shut down the research and development division to boost short-term profits. How many families had he affected? How many children like Savannah had suffered because of his decisions? "What did your father do at Hale Industries?" he asked, dreading the answer. "He was an engineer. He worked on clean energy stuff." Savannah's face scrunched up in concentration. "Solar panels, I think. He always said we needed to protect the Earth for future generations." Nicholas felt sick. The clean energy division had been one of the first to go. He dismissed it as an unnecessary expense, ignoring the protests about its potential long-term benefits. Later that evening, after Maggie had helped Savannah get ready for bed, Nicholas stood in the doorway of the guest room. Savannah was already asleep, curled up under the plush comforter with Theodore tucked safely in her arms. She looked peaceful, perhaps truly comfortable for the first time in months. Nicholas leaned against the doorframe, his mind racing. All his life, he'd measured success in dollars and cents, in profit margins and stock prices. But looking at this small girl, he couldn't help but wonder about the real cost of his choices. How many other families had been torn apart by his ruthless business decisions? How many children had suffered while he'd been focused solely on the bottom line? He thought about his own parents, who had built Hale Industries on principles of innovation and social responsibility. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of their vision, replacing it with a cold pursuit of profit at any cost. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Nicholas's home office as he sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over his laptop keyboard. He hadn't slept much, his mind consumed with thoughts of Savannah and her father. With a deep breath, he logged into the company's personnel database. His hands trembled slightly as he typed Miller into the search field, filtering for employees from 2 years ago. Several entries appeared, but one caught his eye. James Miller, maintenance staff. Nicholas clicked the file and a photo appeared on screen. A man with the same gentle eyes as Savannah, wearing a maintenance uniform with the Hale Industries logo. "Oh God," Nicholas whispered, his throat tightening. He'd expected to find Savannah's father among the engineering staff, but this was worse. James Miller hadn't been an engineer at all. He'd been a janitor, one of the lowest paid employees in the company. As Nicholas read through the file, each detail felt like another weight on his chest. James Miller had worked nights, cleaning the research and development labs. The employee reviews painted a picture of a hard-working man who went above and beyond his duties. There were numerous commendations from the engineering team about how he kept their workspace immaculate and always had a kind word for everyone. Then Nicholas found what he was looking for: the termination notice. It was part of a massive cost-cutting initiative he'd approved without a second thought. Hundreds of support staff had been let go, their positions outsourced to a cleaning service company that offered lower rates. Nicholas remembered signing the paperwork, seeing it only as numbers on a spreadsheet, not as real people with families and children. His own signature stared back at him from the screen, authorizing the termination of James Miller's employment. 3 months later, according to the local newspaper article he found, James Miller died in a car accident while driving home from his second job, a night shift at a warehouse across town. Nicholas pushed away from his desk, his hands shaking. He'd been so focused on maximizing shareholder value that he'd forgotten about the human cost of his decisions. James Miller hadn't been just another number on a spreadsheet. He'd been Savannah's father, working 2 jobs to make ends meet after losing his position at Hale Industries. The sound of laughter drifted in from the kitchen, where Maggie was making breakfast with Savannah. The contrast between the cheerful noise and the devastating truth in front of him made Nicholas's chest ache. After taking a moment to compose himself, Nicholas walked to the kitchen. Savannah sat at the counter wearing the same oversized clothes from yesterday, happily eating pancakes shaped like teddy bears. "Savannah," he said softly, "would you like to visit your mother today?" The little girl's fork clattered against her plate. "Really? Can we?" Her eyes lit up with hope, but there was fear there too. But what if she's having a bad day?" "Then we'll try another day," Nicholas assured her, his voice gentle. "The important thing is that we try." He didn't know exactly how he would make things right, how he could possibly atone for the role he'd played in this family's tragedy. But as he watched Savannah's face brighten at the prospect of seeing her mother, he knew this was just the beginning. He had to try, even if he wasn't sure how. The psychiatric hospital's stark white walls and antiseptic smell made Nicholas's stomach tighten as he walked down the corridor with Savannah. Her small hand gripped his tightly, her other arm clutching her teddy bear. Despite her earlier excitement, she now moved with hesitant steps. "Room 317, the nurse had told them. Each number they passed made Nicholas's heart beat faster. "Will Mommy remember me?" Savannah whispered, her voice trembling. Nicholas squeezed her hand. "Of course she will. Mothers always remember their children. They found Claire's room at the end of the hallway. Through the observation window, Nicholas saw a thin woman with tangled brown hair sitting in a chair, staring blankly at the wall. Savannah pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. "Mommy," she whispered. Inside the room, Claire didn't move when they entered. Her hospital gown hung loosely on her frame, and her eyes seemed focused on something far away. Savannah approached slowly, still holding Nicholas's hand. "Mommy, it's me, Savannah." Her voice was small but hopeful. Claire continued staring at the wall, her fingers absently picking at a loose thread on her gown. Savannah moved closer, reaching out to touch her mother's hand. "Remember when we used to draw pictures together? I still have the crayon set you gave me." Savannah's voice cracked. "I miss you, Mommy." For a brief moment, Claire's eyes flickered toward Savannah. Something passed across her face, a ghost of recognition, a hint of the mother she used to be. Her lips moved slightly, forming what might have been her daughter's name, but no sound came out. Then the moment passed, and she retreated back into her private world of grief. Dr. Peterson, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, waited for them in his office after the visit. "Claire's condition is severe but not hopeless," he explained, his hands folded on his desk. "The loss of her husband triggered a major depressive episode, which developed into psychotic features. With proper treatment and regular visits from Savannah, we might see improvement." "Might?" Nicholas asked, while Savannah sat quietly beside him, clutching her bear. "Our resources are limited," Dr. Peterson admitted. "The hospital's funding has been cut, and Claire's insurance coverage is basic at best. We're doing what we can, but—" Nicholas watched as Savannah wiped tears from her cheeks with her sleeve. His chest felt heavy with the weight of responsibility and guilt. He knew what he had to do, even if he couldn't undo the past. Back in the warmth of Nicholas's penthouse, Savannah sat at the kitchen counter while Maggie prepared hot chocolate. The girl's teddy bear rested in her lap as she told Maggie about the hospital visit, her voice filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "Mommy looked at me for a second," Savannah said, wrapping her small hands around the steaming mug. "Dr. Peterson says she might get better if I visit her more." Maggie's kind eyes softened as she reached across the counter to pat Savannah's hand. "That's wonderful, dear. Sometimes people just need time and love to heal." Nicholas stood in the hallway out of sight, listening to their conversation. His chest tightened at the pure hope in Savannah's voice. She believed in her mother's recovery with the unwavering faith only a child could possess. Later that evening, after Maggie had tucked Savannah into bed, Nicholas sat in his home office, his laptop open to private medical facilities specializing in mental health treatment. The costs were astronomical, but money wasn't an issue. He made several calls, speaking with administrators and mental health specialists. "I need the best care possible for Claire Matthews," he told one facility director. "Cost is no object, but I want results." He drafted emails to his lawyers about setting up a trust fund for Savannah's education and future needs. As he worked, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Each decision, each plan felt right in a way that his previous business dealings never had. The sharp click of heels on marble interrupted his concentration. Nicholas looked up to find his sister Evelyn standing in his office doorway, her expression stern. "I saw the hospital records you requested," Evelyn said, her voice cold. "What exactly are you playing at, Nicholas?" "I'm not playing at anything," Nicholas replied, straightening in his chair. Evelyn moved closer, her designer suit immaculate as always. "Really? Taking in a homeless child? Arranging premium psychiatric care? The board is already talking. They think it's a publicity stunt." "This has nothing to do with publicity," Nicholas said, his voice gaining strength. "Oh, please." Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "Since when do you care about charity cases? You've spent years building our company's reputation on ruthless efficiency." Nicholas stood up, meeting his sister's gaze. "That little girl lost her father because of decisions I made. Her mother is in that hospital because of the chain of events we set in motion with our downsizing." Business is business, Nicholas. We can't save everyone. No, but I can help them, Nicholas replied, his voice firm. For once in my life, I'm doing something that matters. The press will have a field day with this, Evelyn warned. They'll say you're exploiting that child for good publicity. I don't care what they say. Nicholas's voice carried a conviction that seemed to surprise even Evelyn. Savannah needs help. Her mother needs treatment. I have the means to provide both, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Evelyn studied her brother's face, searching for something. You've changed, she said finally. Maybe I'm just remembering who I used to be, Nicholas replied. Who our parents raised us to be. Nicholas sat across from Dr. Peterson and two other specialists in the hospital's conference room, his fingers drumming nervously on the polished table. Charts and medical records lay spread before them, detailing Claire's condition. Mrs. Matthews shows signs of severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, Dr. Peterson explained, his voice gentle but professional. The loss of her husband triggered a breakdown that she hasn't recovered from. A female doctor with silver-streaked hair, Dr. Rivera, leaned forward. The private facility you're suggesting, Meadowbrook Center, has an excellent success rate with similar cases. Their therapeutic approach combines traditional treatment with art therapy and family involvement. Nicholas nodded, taking careful notes. And you believe Claire could improve there? With proper care and support, yes, Dr. Peterson replied. Having her daughter involved in the treatment process could be particularly beneficial. We've seen remarkable improvements in patients when family connections are maintained and nurtured. Later that afternoon, Nicholas brought Savannah for another visit. The little girl clutched a folder full of colorful drawings she'd made the night before. Her face glowed with anticipation as they walked down the sterile hallway. Claire sat in the same chair by the window, her gaze distant. She wore a clean hospital gown, her hair neatly combed, but her eyes remained vacant. Hi, Mommy, Savannah said softly, approaching her mother. I made some pictures for you. Nicholas watched from the doorway as Savannah carefully spread her drawings on the small table beside Claire. There were crayon illustrations of their old house, their family, and even one of Nicholas's penthouse with Maggie in the kitchen. See, Mommy, this is where I'm staying now. Mr. Hale has been really nice to me, Savannah explained, pointing to each drawing. And this one's of you and me and Daddy at the park. Remember how we used to feed the ducks? Claire's fingers twitched slightly, but she didn't respond. Savannah's smile dimmed for just a moment before brightening again. The nurses can put these on your wall, so you can look at them whenever you want. As Savannah arranged her artwork, she noticed a small box on the windowsill. What's this? She asked, reaching for it. Inside, she found a worn photograph. Look, Mr. Hale, she exclaimed, bringing it over to Nicholas. This is from my 7th birthday. Nicholas's throat tightened as he looked at the image. A smiling man with Savannah's eyes held her on his shoulders while Claire beamed beside them. They stood in front of a modest house, a birthday banner visible in the background. The man, Savannah's father, wore the gray uniform of the company's maintenance staff. The memory hit Nicholas like a physical blow. He remembered signing the paperwork for the mass layoffs without a second thought, seeing only numbers on a spreadsheet, not the lives affected. This man's face had been just one of hundreds, his termination just another cost-cutting measure. Now, looking at the joy in the photograph and the devastating aftermath of that decision, Nicholas felt the weight of his past actions more heavily than ever. Savannah carefully returned the photo to its box, unaware of the storm of emotions in Nicholas's heart. Daddy always made the best birthday cakes, she said softly, her small hand lingering on the box. He said even if we couldn't afford fancy presents, we could always have cake and love. Nicholas swallowed hard, watching as Savannah returned to showing her drawings to Claire. The contrast between the happy family in the photograph and the broken pieces before him now served as a stark reminder of how a single decision could shatter so many lives. Nicholas sat alone in his dimly lit office, surrounded by towers of archived personnel files. His eyes burned from hours of reading, but he couldn't stop. Somewhere in these papers lay the truth about Savannah's father. The clock on his desk showed 2 a.m. when he finally found it, a worn manila folder labeled, Matthews, Robert. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, beneath the standard termination forms, he discovered a handwritten letter, the paper creased and yellowed with age. The careful penmanship spoke of someone who had taken great care with every word. "Dear Mr. Thompson," the letter began. Nicholas recognized the name of his former VP of operations. "I'm writing to ask you to reconsider my termination. My wife Claire has been struggling with severe depression, and we've just started her on new medication we can barely afford. Our daughter Savannah is only 7, and without my medical insurance, I don't know how we'll manage Claire's treatment." Nicholas's vision blurred as he read on. Robert Matthews had detailed their financial situation, explaining how he'd worked extra shifts to make ends meet, how he'd never missed a day of work in 8 years. The letter ended with a simple plea. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking for a chance to keep taking care of my family." Paperclipped to the letter was a brief memo from Thompson. "Standard layoff procedure. No exceptions." The coldness of those 4 words made Nicholas's blood boil. The next morning, Nicholas stormed into Thompson's office without warning. The executive looked up from his desk, startled by the intrusion. "Sir, what can I do for you?" Thompson asked, straightening his tie. Nicholas slapped Robert Matthews's letter onto the desk. "Explain this." Thompson glanced at the letter, his expression hardening. "That was part of the necessary downsizing 5 years ago. We had to cut costs." "This man begged you to save his family," Nicholas interrupted, his voice shaking with rage. "He warned you about his wife's condition, about their daughter. You didn't even bother to respond." "Mr. Hale, with all due respect, we can't make exceptions based on sob stories. Business is business." "Business is people," Nicholas shouted, making Thompson flinch. "That sob story was a family's life. That man died because he had to take a second job after we threw him away. His wife is in a mental hospital. His daughter ended up on the streets. I was following standard procedure." "You're fired," Nicholas said quietly, his tone ice cold. "Clear out your office by the end of the day. And Thompson, the severance package you're so proud of, consider it denied. No exceptions." That evening, Nicholas sat in his penthouse living room with Maggie and Savannah. The letter trembled in his hands as he began to read it aloud. Savannah curled up on the couch, hugging her teddy bear tightly as she listened to her father's words. Maggie wiped tears from her eyes as Nicholas's voice cracked on the final lines. Savannah's quiet sobs filled the room. "Your daddy was so brave, Savannah," Nicholas said softly. "He fought so hard for you and your mom. I promise you I'm going to make this right, whatever it takes." The morning sun cast long shadows across Nicholas's office as Evelyn Hale strode in unannounced, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Her perfectly tailored suit and stern expression matched the corporate atmosphere, but her eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she demanded, tossing a newspaper onto his desk. The headline read, "Hale Industries executive fired over historic personnel decision." Nicholas didn't even glance at the paper. "Good morning to you too, Evelyn." "Don't be cute, Nicholas. Thompson is threatening to sue. The board is in an uproar, and suddenly you're playing guardian angel to some homeless child?" Her voice rose with each accusation. "What happened to the brother who understood how to protect our family's legacy?" Nicholas stood up slowly, his face hardening. "Maybe I finally remembered what that legacy should be. Mom and Dad didn't build this company just to make money." "Oh, spare me the sudden moral awakening," Evelyn scoffed. "This girl shows up, bats her eyes, and suddenly you're ready to torch everything we've built? The press will have a field day with this. Billionaire's guilt trip threatens company stability." "Her name is Savannah," Nicholas said quietly but firmly. "And she lost everything because of decisions we made in this very building, decisions I signed off on without a second thought. We make difficult choices every day, that's business." "No," Nicholas cut her off, his voice stronger now. "That's what we tell ourselves to sleep at night. But I've seen the real cost of those difficult choices. I've seen a little girl living on the streets because we couldn't be bothered to read one letter. I've seen her mother locked in a psychiatric ward because we took away their insurance when they needed it most." Evelyn's expression wavered slightly. "Nicholas, you can't save everyone." I'm not trying to save everyone, I'm trying to save this family. This one family that we hurt. He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. And maybe in the process, I can save what's left of my soul. Something in his voice made Evelyn pause. She studied her brother's face, seeing an unfamiliar vulnerability there. You really care about them, don't you? Read this, Nicholas said, pulling out Robert Matthews's letter from his desk drawer. Then tell me how we justify what we did. Evelyn took the letter reluctantly, her eyes scanning the careful handwriting. As she read, her composed expression began to crack. Her hand trembled slightly at the desperate plea of a father trying to protect his family. When she finished, she set the letter down carefully, as if it might shatter. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the door, her usual confident stride slightly unsteady. At the threshold, she paused. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. They'll want answers about Thompson's termination. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. I hope you know what you're doing, Nicholas. She left before he could respond, the letter's words echoing in her mind, challenging everything she thought she knew about their family's empire. The December air filled Nicholas's penthouse with a crisp excitement as he surveyed the transformation taking place. A magnificent 12-foot Christmas tree dominated the living room, its twinkling lights reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maggie Harper bustled about, hanging garlands and arranging ornaments with meticulous care. Do you think it's too much? Nicholas asked, adjusting a red velvet bow on the banister. Maggie smiled warmly. For a child's first real Christmas in years, there's no such thing as too much, Mr. Hale. Nicholas nodded, his eyes scanning the mountain of wrapped presents beneath the tree. Each one had been carefully chosen with Savannah in mind. Art supplies, warm clothes, books, and toys she'd missed out on during her time on the streets. The sight of them made his throat tight with emotion. Evelyn arrived early, carrying additional gifts and wearing an uncharacteristically soft expression. I hope these are appropriate, she said, placing them under the tree. I'm not exactly experienced in shopping for children. The fact that you're here means everything, Nicholas replied quietly. When Savannah emerged from her room, her eyes widened in wonder. She stood frozen at the top of the stairs, taking in the magical scene before her. The Christmas lights reflected in her tears as she slowly descended. Is this all real? She whispered, reaching out to touch a nearby ornament as if to confirm its existence. Nicholas knelt beside her. Very real. Merry Christmas, Savannah. She threw her arms around his neck, squeezing tight. Then she pulled back, her expression suddenly serious. Could Mom come? Just for dinner, maybe? The room grew quiet. Nicholas gently took her hands in his. Your mom needs more time to get better, sweetheart, but I promise we'll visit her tomorrow on Christmas Eve. We'll bring her some presents and your drawings. Savannah nodded bravely, though her disappointment was visible. Okay. I just miss her so much. I know you do, Nicholas said softly. Here, there's something special I want you to open now. He retrieved a small velvet box from beneath the tree. Savannah opened it carefully, revealing a delicate silver necklace. In the center hung a small pendant engraved with the initials RM. Those were your father's initials, Nicholas explained, his voice thick with emotion. Robert Matthews was a good man who loved you very much. I want you to have something to remember him by. Savannah traced the letters with her finger, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's beautiful, she whispered. Your father's strength lives on in you, Savannah, Nicholas said, fastening the necklace around her neck. This is to remind you of that, every single day. Even Evelyn dabbed at her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. Maggie squeezed her shoulder gently, passing her a tissue. Savannah hugged the pendant close to her heart, looking around at the decorated penthouse and the caring faces surrounding her. For the first time in many months, she felt truly at home. Chapter 11. Media Backlash. The morning headlines hit like a thunderbolt. Nicholas's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications as a grainy photo of him and Savannah leaving the psychiatric hospital spread across social media. The image showed him protectively guiding the small girl through a crowd, her teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. "Billionaire's latest PR stunt exploiting homeless child," read one headline. Another declared, "Nicholas Hale's sudden change of heart? Too good to be true?" Nicholas sat in his office, scrolling through the increasingly hostile coverage. His hands trembled slightly as he read comments questioning his motives and dragging Savannah's story into the spotlight. "Turn that off." Evelyn's voice cut through his thoughts as she strode into his office. Her usual sharp business attire was slightly disheveled, suggesting she'd rushed over. "The vultures are circling, but we're not going to let them win." Nicholas looked up, surprised by her presence. "Evelyn, I never meant for this to become public. Savannah doesn't deserve this scrutiny." "I know," she said softly, her usual criticism absent. "Which is why I've already drafted a statement to the press." She handed him a tablet displaying her carefully worded defense of her brother. "You're supporting me?" Nicholas asked, reading her words with growing amazement. "I've watched you change, Nicholas. What you're doing for Savannah and Claire, it's real. It's time someone stood up for that truth." Their conversation was interrupted by Maggie ushering in a teary-eyed Savannah. She held up her tablet showing the news coverage. "Am I making trouble for you?" she asked Nicholas, her voice small and worried. "Maybe I should go back to—" "No," Nicholas said firmly, crossing the room to kneel before her. "Listen to me, Savannah. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy. People might not understand at first, but that doesn't make it any less right." "But they're saying mean things about you because of me," she whispered. "Let them," Nicholas replied, gently wiping away her tears. "What matters is that we're helping your mom get better, and we're doing it together. Everything else is just noise." Evelyn watched the exchange, her expression softening further. She placed a reassuring hand on Savannah's shoulder. "And you have more people in your corner than you know, sweetheart." The private facility gleamed in the winter sunlight, its pristine halls a stark contrast to the stark psychiatric hospital where Claire had spent the last few months. Nicholas walked through the newly prepared room, checking every detail. Soft cream-colored walls, comfortable furniture, and large windows overlooking a peaceful garden created a warm, healing atmosphere. Savannah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by her art supplies. Her small hands moved quickly as she created colorful drawings to decorate her mother's walls. "Do you think Mommy will like these?" she asked, holding up a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. "She'll love them," Nicholas assured her, his voice gentle. He helped her tape the artwork carefully on the walls, making sure each piece was perfectly placed. As they worked together, Savannah glanced at Nicholas. "Did you have a mommy and daddy who loved you too?" Nicholas paused, his hands stilling on the wall. "I did," he said softly. "They were wonderful people. My father taught me that success meant nothing without kindness. And my mother—" He smiled at the memory. "She used to say that every person deserves a chance to be heard." "What happened to them?" Savannah asked, setting down her crayons. "They passed away several years ago," Nicholas replied, sitting down beside her. "After that, I forgot their lessons. I focused on making money and building the company, thinking that was what mattered most. I was wrong." Savannah reached out and patted his hand. "But you remembered now. Thanks to you," he said quietly. Later that afternoon, as they finished preparing the room, Maggie Harper appeared with fresh linens. She watched Nicholas adjusting the curtains while Savannah arranged her teddy bear on a chair near where her mother would sleep. "You know, Mr. Hale," Maggie said, smoothing the bedspread, "all those news articles questioning your motives don't matter one bit. What matters is what you're doing right here, right now." Nicholas turned to face her. "I'm just trying to make things right, Maggie." "And that's exactly what your parents would have wanted," she replied firmly. "Keep following your heart. That's the surest way to honor their memory and help this little girl and her mother." Savannah beamed at them both, clutching another drawing in her hands. "Can we make more pictures for Mommy?" "Of course we can," Nicholas answered, already reaching for the crayons. Snow fell softly outside the psychiatric hospital on Christmas Eve morning as Nicholas's car pulled into the parking lot. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, aware of the importance of this day. Beside him, Savannah fidgeted with her teddy bear, her small face a mix of worry and hope. "What if Mommy doesn't like the new place?" she whispered, pressing closer to Nicholas as they walked through the hospital doors. "The doctors say it's one of the best facilities in the country," Nicholas assured her, his voice gentle. "And you've made it beautiful with all your drawings." The hospital staff moved efficiently but carefully as they prepared Claire for transfer. Claire sat motionless in her wheelchair, her eyes distant, while Savannah held her hand and spoke softly to her. "Mommy, we're going somewhere nice. Nicholas helped us get a pretty new room for you." During the drive to the private facility, Nicholas kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Savannah sat next to her mother in the back seat, never letting go of Claire's hand. She told stories about living with Nicholas and Maggie, about the Christmas decorations in the penthouse, and about all the drawings she'd made. "And Nicholas is so nice, Mommy," Savannah said, her voice full of emotion. "He makes me hot chocolate just like Daddy used to." Nicholas felt his throat tighten at her words. The past few weeks had changed him in ways he never expected. The cold businessman who once signed dismissal papers without a second thought now felt every emotion deeply. At the private facility, the staff welcomed them warmly. Claire's new room looked nothing like a hospital room. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and large windows created a peaceful atmosphere. Savannah immediately began showing her mother the drawings she'd taped to the walls. "See, Mommy? I drew us together in the garden, and here's one of your favorite flowers," Savannah explained, pointing to each picture. "I put them here so you'll always feel loved, even when I'm not visiting." As Savannah spoke, something shifted in Claire's expression. A single tear rolled down her cheek, catching the winter sunlight. Savannah gasped softly, touching her mother's face. "Mommy?" Nicholas watched the moment unfold, his heart full of hope. Perhaps this was the first step toward healing, not just for Claire, but for all of them. Snow continued to fall as Nicholas's penthouse filled with the warm aroma of Maggie's Christmas cooking. He paced nervously, waiting for Evelyn to arrive. When the elevator dinged, Savannah rushed to greet their guest, her party dress swishing around her knees. Evelyn stood awkwardly in the entrance, a carefully wrapped gift in her hands. Her eyes softened at the sight of Savannah's eager face. "I brought something for the table," she said, handing the package to Maggie. During dinner, the tension gradually melted away like frost on a window. Evelyn watched her brother, really watched him, and saw something she hadn't noticed before, genuine happiness in his eyes. "Did Nicholas ever tell you about the time he tried to catch Santa?" Evelyn asked Savannah, a playful smile crossing her face. Savannah shook her head, leaning forward eagerly. "He was 7, Evelyn continued, and he set up this elaborate trap in the living room with string and bells, but he fell asleep waiting and got tangled in his own trap on Christmas morning." Savannah's laughter rang out, clear and bright like silver bells. The sound seemed to fill every corner of the room, making everyone pause. It had been so long since they'd heard her truly laugh. Nicholas felt tears prick at his eyes. This was what healing sounded like. After dinner, Nicholas retrieved a small velvet box from his study. "Savannah," he said softly, "I have something special for you." He opened the box to reveal a gleaming pocket watch, its silver case newly polished. "This belonged to your father," Nicholas explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I found it in the company's stored personal effects. I had it restored for you." Savannah's hands trembled as she took the watch. She opened it carefully, revealing the inscription inside. "Time spent with family is time well spent." "You're my Christmas angel," Savannah whispered, throwing her arms around Nicholas's neck. "Thank you." Evelyn watched the scene unfold, her perfectly maintained composure cracking. She saw in that moment not the cold corporate titan she'd known, but the brother she remembered from childhood, the one who once had a heart big enough to try catching Santa Claus. Maggie quietly wiped away tears as she cleared the dessert plates, while the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the city in peaceful white. The Christmas morning peace shattered as Nicholas's phone exploded with notifications. Headlines screamed across news sites. Billionaire's charity case. The dark truth behind Nicholas Hale's redemption. Nicholas's hands shook as he read the anonymous leak detailing how he had personally signed off on the downsizing that left Savannah's father jobless. The media was ruthless, painting him as a calculating hypocrite using his wealth to cover up past cruelties. "Did you know?" Savannah's small voice made him jump. She stood in her Christmas pajamas, clutching her father's pocket watch. "Yes," Nicholas answered honestly, his voice rough. "And I'm going to make it right." Within hours, Nicholas arranged an emergency press conference. Camera flashes blinded him as he stepped up to the podium, his sister Evelyn watching from the sidelines with crossed arms. "Yes, I signed the document that cost James Miller his job," Nicholas began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I was a different person then, someone who saw numbers instead of people, someone who forgot the values my own parents taught me." He paused, gripping the podium tighter. "I can't undo that decision, but I can honor James Miller's memory. Today I'm announcing the creation of the Miller Foundation, dedicated to supporting families facing mental health challenges and financial hardship. Every penny I've earned from the downsizing will go to this cause." Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping. Is this just damage control? How do you respond to accusations of exploitation? What about the other families affected by your decisions? Before Nicholas could answer, Savannah pushed through the crowd of reporters. She climbed the steps to the podium and took his hand. The cameras went wild. "My daddy always said that good people can make mistakes," she said clearly into the microphone, "but great people try to fix them." The room fell silent. Nicholas felt tears threatening to spill as Savannah hugged him tightly. "Daddy would be proud of you," she whispered. Later, in the quiet of his office, Evelyn approached him. Her usual sharp expression had softened. "I was wrong about you, Nicholas," she admitted. "This isn't about publicity. You've really changed." Nicholas and Savannah walked down the pristine hallway of the private facility, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. The Christmas decorations adorning the walls cast a warm glow, but Nicholas could feel Savannah's hand trembling in his as they approached Claire's room. Inside, Claire sat in a plush armchair by the window, her vacant eyes fixed on the colorful drawings Savannah had taped to the walls. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes and the hollowness in her cheeks. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Savannah whispered, moving closer to her mother. Claire didn't respond, her gaze unwavering from the wall of artwork. Savannah knelt beside her mother's chair, her small fingers reaching out to touch Claire's hand. The facility staff stood quietly near the door, watching with practiced patience. Then, in a voice as delicate as morning frost, Savannah began to sing. "Hush now, my darling. The day's almost through." It was a simple lullaby, one her father had sung to her every night before bed. Her voice trembled with emotion, but she pressed on, each word carrying years of love and longing. As the melody filled the room, something shifted in Claire's expression. Her fingers twitched against the armrest. Tears began to well up in her eyes, catching the Christmas lights like tiny stars. "Savannah?" Claire's whisper was barely audible, but it might as well have been a shout in the quiet room. It was the first time she'd spoken her daughter's name in months. Savannah's song caught in her throat. "Mommy," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. Claire's hand slowly moved to cup Savannah's cheek, her thumb brushing away a tear. The moment was as fragile as spun glass, mother and daughter connecting through a veil of shared grief and hope. Nicholas watched from the doorway, his chest tight with emotion. The scene before him was almost too private, too sacred to witness. He stepped backward into the hallway, letting out a shaky breath. Leaning against the wall, he closed his eyes and made a silent promise to himself. He would never abandon them again. These two precious souls, brought into his life by chance or fate, had become his responsibility, his family. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nicholas's office as he sat at his desk, reviewing the press coverage from earlier that day. A soft knock at the door made him look up to find Evelyn standing there, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something more hesitant. "Can we talk?" she asked, stepping into the warm light of his office. Nicholas gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." Evelyn sat down, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice unusually quiet. "For the past 5 years, I've been secretly funding charities in Mom and Dad's name." Nicholas's eyes widened. "What?" "Youth programs, homeless shelters, medical research." Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. "I kept it hidden because I thought it would make me look weak in the corporate world." "Silly, isn't it?" Nicholas leaned forward, studying his sister's face. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because watching you with Savannah, seeing how you've changed." Evelyn paused, collecting her thoughts. "It made me realize I've been hiding my true self just like you were. That foundation you promised to create at the press conference, I want to help." Nicholas felt a warmth spread through his chest. "You do?" "Yes," Evelyn said firmly. "Seeing you transform, watching you fight for Savannah and Claire, it reminded me of who we used to be, of who Mom and Dad raised us to be. I'm tired of pretending I don't care." Nicholas stood up and walked around his desk. "Savannah and Claire," he said softly, "they woke something up in me that I thought was long dead. They reminded me of what Mom and Dad always said about responsibility and compassion. We lost our way after they died," Evelyn admitted, standing to face her brother. "But maybe it's not too late to find it again." "Together?" Nicholas asked, extending his hand. Evelyn took it, squeezing firmly. "Together. Let's make Mom and Dad proud." They shared a moment of understanding, years of distance and mistrust melting away in the quiet of the office. The siblings who had drifted so far apart were finally finding their way back to each other, united by a shared purpose and the memory of their parents' values. The private facility's walls seemed brighter with each passing day, matching the slow but steady improvement in Claire's condition. Savannah sat cross-legged on the floor beside her mother's chair, carefully turning the pages of her favorite storybook. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, catching the silver chain of her father's pocket watch that now hung around her neck. "And then the butterfly found its way home," Savannah read softly, looking up at Claire with hopeful eyes. Her mother's lips curved into a gentle smile, small but real, as she listened to her daughter's voice. At the Foundation's temporary office space downtown, Nicholas and Evelyn pored over architectural plans spread across a conference table. Maggie Harper stood nearby, making notes about furniture arrangements and color schemes. "What do you think about making the waiting area more child-friendly?" Evelyn suggested, pointing to a corner of the blueprint. Nicholas nodded, thinking of Savannah. "Speaking of which, how's the mural coming along?" They turned to watch Savannah, who had arrived earlier with her art supplies. She stood on a small stepladder, carefully adding splashes of bright yellow to a large canvas. The painting showed a group of people holding hands under a rainbow, with butterflies dancing around them. "It's about hope," Savannah had explained when she first started. "Like the butterflies in my stories." Later that afternoon, Nicholas accompanied Savannah on her daily visit to Claire. The room was filled with Savannah's artwork now. Drawings of flowers, animals, and happy families covered nearly every wall. Claire's eyes followed her daughter as she arranged her newest creation on the bedside table. "Look, Mom," Savannah said, pointing to her drawing of 2 butterflies. "I made them blue because that's your favorite color." Claire lifted her hand slowly, touching Savannah's cheek with trembling fingers. Her eyes, clearer than they had been in months, filled with tears. "I'm proud of you, my little angel," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse but filled with love. Savannah gasped, throwing her arms around her mother. Nicholas stood in the doorway, his throat tight with emotion as he watched them embrace. In that moment, he felt something settle in his heart, a sense of rightness, of purpose found. The cold, distant businessman he had once been seemed like a stranger now, replaced by someone who finally understood what truly mattered. In the gleaming conference room of Hale Enterprises, Nicholas and Evelyn sat surrounded by finalized blueprints and foundation documents. The morning sun caught the elegant lettering on the main document. The James Walker Memorial Foundation, named after Savannah's father. Housing assistance, emergency financial aid, and comprehensive mental health support, Evelyn read aloud, her voice warm with approval. James would have been proud of this. Nicholas touched the foundation's logo mock-up gently. Savannah's design captured everything perfectly. In the corner of the room, Savannah stood on a small platform, carefully painting the foundation's logo on a large canvas. Her small hands moved with surprising precision as she added golden details to the pocket watch at the center, surrounding it with reaching hands in soft, warm colors. "The hands mean nobody has to be alone," Savannah explained, not taking her eyes off her work. "Like how you helped me and Mommy." Later that afternoon, the foundation's unveiling event filled the newly renovated building's main hall. Cameras flashed as Nicholas stood at the podium, with Savannah by his side, her father's pocket watch gleaming against her dress. "Second chances aren't just gifts we give others," Nicholas said, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "They're opportunities for us to remember our own humanity. James Walker taught his daughter the value of compassion, and through her she taught me the same lesson." Savannah beamed up at him, paint still speckling her fingers from finishing the logo just hours before. Evelyn watched from the side, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, while Maggie squeezed her hand supportively. After the speeches ended and the crowd began to thin, an older man approached Nicholas and Savannah, his weathered face crinkled with emotion as he introduced himself as Tom, a former maintenance worker. "I worked with your father, sweetheart," he said to Savannah. "When my wife got sick, I couldn't afford her medicine. Your dad gave me his entire paycheck that month." Tom's voice wavered. He said, "We take care of each other here." I never forgot that. Nicholas listened intently, his hand resting protectively on Savannah's shoulder. The story hit him hard, another testament to the man whose absence had changed so many lives. In that moment, Nicholas knew with absolute certainty that the foundation would carry forward James Walker's legacy of kindness and compassion. The winter morning dawned crisp and bright as Nicholas and Savannah arrived at the private facility. Today marked a significant milestone. Claire's doctors had finally approved her first supervised outing. The anticipation hung in the air like delicate frost. Claire sat in her room, wearing a warm burgundy sweater that Savannah had picked out for her. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned her coat, but her eyes held a new spark of awareness that hadn't been there months ago. "Are you ready, Mom?" Savannah asked softly, holding out a pair of knitted gloves. "The park looks magical with all the Christmas decorations." Claire nodded, her movements careful and deliberate. "I think so, sweetheart." Her voice was quiet but steady, a marked improvement from the silence that had dominated their early visits. Nicholas watched from the doorway as one of the nurses did a final check of Claire's vitals. The facility staff had prepared thoroughly for this outing, making sure Claire was strong enough for the short walk to the nearby park. The small family made their way slowly down the path, with Savannah chattering excitedly between them. Nicholas kept a watchful eye on Claire, ready to support her if needed. The park entrance welcomed them with twinkling lights strung through bare branches, casting a warm glow even in the morning light. "Look, Mom," Savannah pointed to a row of decorated trees. "The community made them all different. That one has origami birds, and that one has silver bells." Claire took in the sights with wide eyes, occasionally squeezing Savannah's hand. Nicholas noticed how she seemed to grow stronger with each step, drawing energy from her daughter's enthusiasm. As they rounded a corner, Savannah suddenly gasped, "Mom, look at that snowman!" She tugged gently at Claire's sleeve, pointing to a carefully crafted snow figure wearing a familiar-looking scarf and hat. Claire stopped, her eyes fixed on the snowman. Something in its jolly expression and the way its scarf was wrapped reminded her of James. A soft sound escaped her lips. A laugh, small but genuine. It was like music in the winter air. Nicholas quickly pulled out his phone, capturing the precious moment. Claire's laugh, Savannah's delighted expression, the perfect winter scene. It was a snapshot of healing he wanted to preserve forever. "James," Claire whispered, touching her daughter's shoulder. He used to make snowmen just like that, didn't he? Savannah nodded eagerly, her eyes bright with tears and joy. With the crooked smile and everything. They spent a few more minutes admiring the decorations before Claire showed signs of tiring. The walk back to the facility was peaceful, with Claire leaning slightly on Nicholas's arm for support. Back in her room, as Savannah went to get hot chocolate with one of the nurses, Claire turned to Nicholas. Her eyes were clear and focused, filled with gratitude and understanding. "Nicholas," she said softly, "you've been the guardian my family never had." Her words carried the weight of months of observation and growing awareness. "Thank you for protecting my little girl when I couldn't." Nicholas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'll always be here," he promised, his voice thick. "For both of you. We'll get through this recovery together, one day at a time." Claire nodded, a peaceful smile settling on her face as she watched the winter sun through her window. The moment held the quiet triumph of another step forward in their journey together. The grand ballroom of the Hale Corporation's headquarters buzzed with anticipation. Evelyn Hale stood at the podium, her usual sharp business attire softened by a gentle smile. The crowd of executives, shareholders, and media representatives fell silent as she began to speak. "For years, I've hidden a part of myself," Evelyn's voice carried clearly through the room. "Like many of you, I believed that success meant focusing solely on profits and growth. But my parents, Richard and Margaret Hale, taught us differently." She paused, her eyes finding Nicholas and Savannah in the front row. Savannah wore a pretty blue dress, her father's pocket watch hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. "In secret, I've been funding charities in my parents' names," Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger. "I was afraid that showing compassion might be seen as weakness. But a remarkable little girl and her family showed me that true strength lies in having the courage to care." The room remained silent, hanging on her every word as she shared the story of Savannah's father, his desperate plea for help, and the tragic consequences of corporate indifference. "Today, I'm proud to announce my full involvement in the James Morrison Foundation, named after a man whose dignity and love for his family should have been respected, not dismissed." Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. "This foundation will ensure that no other family faces the challenges that Savannah and her mother endured." The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the ballroom. Savannah beamed up at Nicholas, who wiped away a tear. As the applause died down, Evelyn noticed Marcus Wheeler, the board member who had personally rejected James Morrison's letter, trying to slip away. She stepped down from the podium and intercepted him. "Marcus," her voice was steel wrapped in silk, "we need to discuss the reforms I'm proposing to our employment policies." Wheeler shifted uncomfortably. "Evelyn, business decisions can't always be based on emotional appeals." "No," Evelyn cut him off. "They should be based on humanity. Your dismissal of James Morrison's situation wasn't just callous, it was short-sighted. We're implementing a new employee support program, effective immediately." Wheeler's face reddened. "The board won't—" "The board already has." Evelyn's smile was razor-sharp. "Perhaps you missed the memo while you were trying to avoid responsibility for past mistakes." Later that evening in Nicholas's penthouse, Evelyn sat on the plush sofa beside her brother. They watched Savannah adding final touches to her latest drawing, a family portrait that included both of them. "I never thought I'd say this," Evelyn said softly, "but I'm truly proud of what we're doing, Nicholas. Not just the foundation, but everything it represents." Nicholas squeezed her hand. "Mom and Dad would be proud too." Savannah bounded over with her completed drawing. "Look what I made." She thrust the paper toward them proudly. Evelyn studied the colorful figures. "It's beautiful, Savannah. Is that all of us?" "Yes." Savannah pointed to each figure. "There's Nicholas, and Mom, and me, and you, Aunt Evelyn." Evelyn's breath caught at the title. Savannah threw her arms around her neck in a warm hug, and Evelyn held her close, finally embracing the joy of being part of this unexpected family. The foundation's office buzzed with quiet excitement as staff members gathered around the covered wall. Savannah stood nervously beside her masterpiece, her small hands fidgeting with the pocket watch around her neck. The mural, hidden behind a velvet curtain, represented weeks of careful work and countless hours of painting. Nicholas stepped forward, his hand resting gently on Savannah's shoulder. "Would you like to do the honors?" he asked softly. Savannah nodded, her eyes bright with anticipation. With trembling fingers, she pulled the cord, and the curtain fell away. A collective gasp filled the room. The mural stretched across the wall in vibrant colors, a Christmas scene that captured both joy and hope. In the center, a family stood hand in hand beneath a massive pocket watch that glowed like a winter moon. The watch's hands pointed to midnight, casting golden light over the snow-covered scene below. Every brushstroke seemed to pulse with life and warmth. "It's beautiful," whispered one of the staff members, wiping away tears. Nicholas knelt beside Savannah, his eyes glistening. "Do you know what this means?" he asked, gesturing to the mural. "This isn't just a painting. It's hope. It's healing." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Every person who walks through these doors will see this and know they're not alone." Savannah leaned against him, pride and uncertainty mixing in her expression. "Really?" "Really," Nicholas assured her. "You've captured exactly what we're trying to do here, bringing families together, giving them support when they need it most." Evelyn stepped forward, carrying a large wrapped package. "Speaking of support," she said, her usual businesslike tone softened by affection, "I have something for you, Savannah." Savannah's eyes widened as Evelyn handed her the gift. "But Christmas isn't for days yet." "Consider this an early present," Evelyn smiled. "Open it." Savannah carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a professional art set, complete with paints, brushes, and a wooden case engraved with her name. Her mouth fell open in surprise. "I'd like to sponsor your art education," Evelyn announced. "Private lessons, summer programs, whatever you need to develop your talent." Savannah launched herself at Evelyn, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Thank you, Aunt Evelyn." Later that evening, Nicholas stood alone in his office, gazing out at the city lights. The events of the past month played through his mind like scenes from a movie. Finding Savannah in the cold, discovering the truth about her father, watching Claire's slow but steady recovery, and witnessing Evelyn's transformation. He pulled out an old photograph of his parents from his desk drawer. Their kind faces smiled up at him, and for the first time in years, he felt worthy of their legacy. "Thank you," he whispered to their image. "Thank you for teaching me what really matters. I just wish it hadn't taken me so long to remember." The pocket watch in his office chimed softly, marking another hour. Its sound reminded him of Savannah's mural, of time passing, of second chances, of hope illuminating the darkness. Nicholas realized that in trying to help Savannah and her mother, he had found his own path to healing. The documentary crew set up their equipment in Nicholas's office, carefully positioning lights to capture the warmth of the mahogany walls and the stunning city view behind his desk. The interviewer, a respected journalist known for her thoughtful profiles, sat across from Nicholas with a gentle smile. "Mr. Hale," she began, "your foundation has helped hundreds of families in just a few months, but this all started with one little girl. Can you tell us about that night?" Nicholas's eyes softened as he recalled the memory. "I was leaving a charity gala, one I hadn't wanted to attend. The truth is, I was just going through the motions back then. And there she was, this tiny figure on the sidewalk with nothing but a teddy bear." His voice caught slightly. "I didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything." The camera panned across photographs on his desk, Savannah's artwork, Claire's recovery progress, the foundation's opening day. Nicholas continued, his voice growing stronger. "I made terrible mistakes. I signed papers that ruined lives without considering the human cost. Savannah's father was one of those people, and that truth haunts me. But owning our mistakes, facing them head-on, that's how we grow." The documentary cut to footage of Claire Hale in the private facility, her improvement evident in each frame. She sat in a sunny room, helping Savannah with a new painting. Her hands were steady now, her eyes clear and focused. The voiceover explained her journey, highlighting the foundation's commitment to mental health support. The camera lingered on Savannah's mural, now famous throughout the city. Staff members and families shared stories of how the image gave them hope. One mother, crying softly, described how the foundation had helped her keep her home and find therapy for her children. Nicholas Hale was known as the Ice King of Wall Street, the narrator explained as old news clips played. But through one child's influence, he discovered his true calling. Evelyn appeared on screen, her usual polish softened by genuine emotion. "My brother always had this capacity for compassion," she shared. "He just needed Savannah to remind him of who he really was." As the documentary aired, Nicholas sat in his penthouse living room with Savannah curled up beside him and Evelyn in a nearby armchair. They watched in silence as the story unfolded on screen, their story of redemption, healing, and unexpected family. When the final segment showed Nicholas working late at the foundation, Savannah squeezed his hand. Looking up at him with eyes full of wisdom beyond her years, she said softly, "I think Daddy would have been proud of you too." Nicholas felt tears well up in his eyes. He pulled Savannah closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Savannah. You changed my life. You helped me remember what really matters." Evelyn discreetly wiped away her own tears, watching her brother and the little girl who had brought their family back to life. On screen, the foundation's logo spun slowly. The pocket watch surrounded by helping hands, a perfect symbol of time's ability to heal when guided by compassion. The foundation's main hall sparkled with silver and gold decorations as Nicholas surveyed the final preparations for the New Year's celebration. Crystalline snowflakes hung from the ceiling, catching the warm light and casting delicate shadows across the walls. Savannah's mural served as a stunning backdrop to the small stage where various families would share their stories. Evelyn moved purposefully through the space, directing staff members with gentle efficiency. She had traded her usual corporate attire for a softer, midnight blue dress that matched the winter theme. Maggie Harper arranged fresh flowers on each table, making sure every detail was perfect for the evening ahead. "The programs look beautiful," Maggie said, showing Nicholas the elegant cards that featured a photograph of Savannah's father alongside the foundation's mission statement. "And wait until you see what Savannah's wearing. She's so excited about her speech." Nicholas smiled, touching the program's embossed lettering. "I never thought I'd be here," he admitted quietly. "Running a foundation, helping families, being part of something bigger than profit margins." Evelyn approached, adjusting one of the table centerpieces. "Mom and Dad would have loved this," she said softly, "especially seeing their children working together again." As evening fell, families began arriving, dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the foundation's work. Claire Hale entered with a social worker from the facility, looking stronger than ever in a simple green dress. Her eyes were clear and present as she watched Savannah practice her speech one last time backstage. When the time came, Savannah stepped up to the microphone. Her dark hair was neatly braided, and she wore a white dress with tiny silver stars. In her hands, she held a carefully written letter. The room fell silent as she began to read. "Dear Daddy," she started, her voice clear and strong. "I miss you every day, but I want you to know that I'm not alone anymore. Nicholas found me that cold night, just like you used to say angels find people who need them most." She paused, looking at Nicholas with a smile. "He made mistakes before, but he's working so hard to fix them. He helped Mommy get better, and he gave us a new family." Claire wiped tears from her eyes as Savannah continued. "Aunt Evelyn teaches me about art and business, and she says I'm as smart as you always told me I was. Ms. Maggie makes sure I eat vegetables and helps me with homework just like you would want." The audience listened intently as Savannah described how the foundation had helped other families find hope again. "Your pocket watch sits on my dresser," she read, "and every time I look at it, I remember what you taught me about being kind and brave. I promise to keep making you proud." Nicholas stood at the back of the room, his heart full as he watched this little girl who had changed everything. Evelyn squeezed his hand and Maggie dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Claire beamed with pride from her seat in the front row. After the speech, they gathered near the large windows overlooking the city. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the world in white. Nicholas looked at the faces around him. Savannah's bright smile, Claire's renewed strength, Evelyn's gentle wisdom, and Maggie's steadfast support. Under the winter sky, surrounded by the family he never expected to have, Nicholas felt a deep sense of purpose. "This is only the beginning," he said softly, watching the snowflakes dance in the night air. The winter sunlight streamed through the windows of Claire's room at the private facility, casting a warm glow on the carefully arranged furniture. Savannah sat cross-legged on the bed next to her mother, a handmade scrapbook balanced on her lap. The book's cover sparkled with glitter and stickers, and "Our Family" was written in Savannah's neat handwriting. "I made this for you, Mom," Savannah said softly, opening the first page. "Look, here's Dad teaching me how to ride my bike." Claire's fingers trembled as she touched the photograph. Her eyes, clearer now after weeks of treatment, took in every detail. Nicholas stood quietly by the door, watching the tender moment unfold. Page after page, Savannah showed her mother the memories she'd collected. There were old family photos, new drawings of their time with Nicholas, and pictures from the foundation's opening. Claire's eyes welled with tears as she absorbed each image, each story. "And here's the mural I painted," Savannah explained, pointing to a photograph. "See? The pocket watch is just like Dad's." Something shifted in Claire's expression. She straightened up, touching the image with purpose. "Your father wore that watch every single day," she said clearly, her voice steady and warm. "Even when times were tough, he'd say, 'Time keeps moving forward and so must we.'" Savannah's eyes widened at her mother's words. Claire continued, her voice growing stronger. "He worked 3 jobs once just to make sure we had everything we needed. But he never complained. Every night he'd come home and still find energy to read you stories." Nicholas watched as Claire pulled Savannah closer, really looking at her daughter. A genuine smile spread across her face, the first they'd seen since her admission to the facility. "He would be so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud of your strength, your art, your kind heart." Claire looked up at Nicholas, her eyes clear and present. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking care of our little girl." Later, as Nicholas and Savannah walked down the facility's hallway toward the exit, Savannah's small hand found his. She looked up at him, hope shining in her eyes. "I think Mom's going to be okay," she said quietly. Nicholas squeezed her hand gently. "I promise I'll keep doing everything I can to help her, Savannah. Everything." The grand ballroom of the Hale Foundation sparkled with golden lights and winter decorations. Crystal snowflakes hung from the ceiling, catching the warm glow of chandeliers. Nicholas Hale stood at the entrance, greeting families who had received help from the foundation over the past month. Each face held a story of hope and renewal. Evelyn Hale moved gracefully through the crowd, her usual corporate demeanor replaced by genuine warmth as she chatted with guests. She paused occasionally to straighten the festive decorations that Savannah had helped design, each one incorporating subtle nods to her father's memory, tiny pocket watches and helping hands woven into the arrangements. "Look at all these people," Savannah whispered to Nicholas, clutching his hand. She wore a new blue dress that matched her eyes, her father's pocket watch hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. "They're all here because of Daddy's dream." Nicholas squeezed her hand gently. "That's right. And because of you, too." One by one, families took to the small stage to share their stories. A mother spoke about finding housing after months of struggle. A father described how the foundation had helped with his children's medical bills. Each testimony brought tears to eyes throughout the room. When it was Savannah's turn to speak, she walked to the microphone with quiet confidence. Her small voice carried clearly through the ballroom. "My daddy always said that helping others was the most important thing we could do," she began, her fingers touching the pocket watch. "He helped everyone he could, even when we didn't have much ourselves. Now, because of Uncle Nicholas and Aunt Evelyn, my daddy's dream of helping people is coming true in a bigger way than he could have imagined." She paused, looking at Nicholas with shining eyes. "When I was alone, Uncle Nicholas found me. He didn't just give me a warm place to stay, he gave me hope. He helped my mom get better, and he turned my daddy's memory into something that helps other families." Tears rolled down cheeks throughout the audience. Even Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Thank you, Uncle Nicholas and Aunt Evelyn, for showing me that angels don't just exist in heaven. They walk among us, wearing business suits and carrying briefcases." A ripple of tender laughter moved through the crowd. As Savannah finished her speech, Nicholas walked to the stage. His voice was thick with emotion as he addressed the gathering. "Tonight, we have someone very special to introduce." He gestured toward the back of the room. "Claire Hale, would you please join us?" Claire walked slowly but steadily toward the stage, wearing a simple, elegant dress. Her eyes were clear and present, showing no trace of the vacant stare that had haunted her for so long. The room fell silent as she took the microphone. "A few months ago, I was lost in darkness," Claire began, her voice trembling slightly. "My husband's death had broken something inside me, and I couldn't find my way back to my beautiful daughter." She reached for Savannah's hand. "But through the kindness of Nicholas Hale and his sister Evelyn, through the love of my precious Savannah, and through the care provided by the foundation, I found my way home." Nicholas stood in his penthouse living room holding an envelope behind his back. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow on Savannah as she worked on her latest drawing at the coffee table. "Savannah," he called softly, "I have something important to tell you." She looked up from her artwork, her blue eyes curious. Nicholas sat down beside her on the plush sofa, his heart full of anticipation. "Remember how we talked about your amazing artistic talent?" He pulled out the envelope. "Well, the foundation has created a special scholarship, and you're going to be its first recipient. You've been accepted into the Wellington Academy of Arts." Savannah's eyes widened as she took the envelope with trembling hands. But that's the best art school in the city," she whispered, her voice catching. "Are you sure I deserve this?" Maggie Harper, who had been quietly arranging flowers nearby, came over and sat on Savannah's other side. "Of course you deserve it, sweetheart," she said, wrapping an arm around the girl's shoulders. "I've watched you pour your heart into every drawing. Your father would be so proud of how hard you've worked." Tears welled up in Savannah's eyes as she traced the school's golden emblem on the acceptance letter. "But what if I'm not good enough?" "Not good enough?" Evelyn's voice came from the doorway. She walked in carrying a large package wrapped in silver paper. "The talent committee was amazed by your portfolio. They said your work shows remarkable depth for someone so young." Evelyn sat down across from them and handed Savannah the package. "This is to help you on your journey." With careful fingers, Savannah unwrapped the gift. Inside was a professional art set, pristine brushes, premium paints, and a rainbow of pastels nestled in a wooden case with her name engraved on a golden plate. "Oh," Savannah breathed, running her fingers over the supplies. "It's beautiful." "Just like your art," Evelyn said softly. "You have a gift, Savannah. Don't let doubt hold you back from sharing it with the world." Later that afternoon, Nicholas drove Savannah to visit Claire at the private facility. They found her in the garden room, looking healthy and engaged as she tended to a small plant. "Mom!" Savannah rushed forward, the acceptance letter clutched to her chest. "Look what Uncle Nicholas and the foundation did." Claire took the letter, her eyes growing bright as she read. "The Wellington Academy?" She pulled Savannah into a tight hug. "Oh, my darling girl. Your father always said you'd do amazing things with your art." "You think he'd be happy?" Savannah asked, her voice small. "Happy?" Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. "He'd be overjoyed. You're using your talent to bring beauty into the world, just like he always wanted." She held her daughter's face between her hands. "This is your chance to make your mark, sweetheart, to honor your father's memory by following your dreams." The winter morning was crisp and clear as Nicholas's car pulled up to the cemetery gates. Frost sparkled on the grass, and their breath formed little clouds in the cold air. Savannah sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching a bouquet of white lilies and the precious pocket watch Nicholas had given her. "Are you ready?" Nicholas asked gently, watching her face for any signs of distress. Savannah nodded, her small hand finding his as they walked between the rows of headstones. When they reached her father's grave, she squeezed Nicholas's hand tighter. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, kneeling to place the flowers against the cold stone. Her fingers traced the engraved letters of her father's name. "I brought you something special." With trembling hands, Savannah took off the pocket watch and carefully placed it on the headstone. "This is to say thank you for watching over me when I was alone, for sending me Uncle Nicholas." Nicholas knelt beside her in the frosty grass, his heart aching with both guilt and love. He placed his hand on her shoulder, steadying her as she sniffled quietly. "Savannah," he said softly, turning her to face him, "I want you to know something." He took both her small hands in his. "I promise to always be here for you and your mother. You're my family now, and I will protect you both with everything I have." Tears spilled down Savannah's cheeks as she threw her arms around Nicholas's neck. "Thank you," she sobbed into his shoulder. "You're like my second dad now. Is that okay?" Nicholas held her tightly, his own eyes welling up. "That's more than okay, sweetheart. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They stayed there for a moment, holding each other in the quiet morning air. Finally, Savannah pulled back and turned toward the grave one last time. "Goodbye, Daddy," she whispered, her voice carrying on the winter breeze. "Thank you for watching over me." As they walked back to the car, Savannah looked over her shoulder at the headstone where the pocket watch glinted in the morning sun. Nicholas felt a tear roll down his cheek, quickly wiping it away as a profound sense of redemption washed over him. In helping Savannah heal, he had found his own path to forgiveness. Spring sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows as Nicholas and Savannah made final preparations for Claire's homecoming. Savannah darted around the living room, adjusting vases filled with yellow daffodils, her mother's favorite flowers. Her artwork decorated the walls, bringing warmth and color to every corner. "Do you think Mom will like it?" Savannah asked, smoothing out a wrinkle in the welcome home banner she'd painted. Nicholas smiled, his heart full as he watched her nervous excitement. "She'll love it, sweetheart. Everything is perfect." When the elevator doors opened, Claire stepped into the penthouse, her eyes widening at the transformation. She looked healthier now, her cheeks rosy and her smile genuine. Savannah rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. "Welcome home, Mom," she exclaimed, burying her face in Claire's sweater. "Nah." Later that evening, they gathered around the dining table where Maggie had prepared Claire's favorite meal. Evelyn joined them, bringing a bouquet of roses to mark the occasion. The warm glow of candles cast a gentle light over their faces as Claire raised her glass. "I never thought I'd be here," Claire began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Nicholas, you didn't just save Savannah, you saved both of us. You gave us back our lives when we had lost everything." She wiped away a tear. "Thank you for being our guardian angel." Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed her brother's hand. "I've never been prouder to call you my brother, Nicholas. You've become the man our parents always knew you could be." Savannah slipped away from the table and returned with something clutched carefully in her hands. She approached her mother, holding out her father's repaired pocket watch. "Dad would want you to have this, Mom," she said softly. "Uncle Nicholas fixed it for us." Claire's hands shook as she accepted the watch, tears falling freely now. Nicholas watched as mother and daughter embraced, the pocket watch pressed between their hearts. Evelyn moved to join them, and Nicholas found himself pulled into the group hug, their family circle complete. In that moment, surrounded by love and healing, Nicholas understood that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. What had started with a chance encounter on a cold winter night had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. Easter morning dawned bright and clear, casting a golden glow through the foundation's tall windows. Nicholas Hale stood in the entrance hall, watching as families streamed into the building, their faces bright with anticipation. Beside him, Savannah clutched Claire's hand, her eyes sparkling as she watched people gather beneath her mural. The artwork dominated the wall, its colors more vibrant than ever in the spring light. The Christmas scene she had painted now seemed to tell a broader story of hope and renewal. The pocket watch in the painting gleamed, its hands frozen at midnight, marking the moment everything changed. "Look, Mom," Savannah whispered excitedly, pointing to a young family admiring her work. "They're taking pictures of the mural." Claire squeezed her daughter's hand, her eyes misting with pride. "Your father would have loved this, sweetheart. He always said your art would touch people's hearts." The community hall filled quickly with families who had been helped by the foundation. Children ran around with Easter baskets while parents chatted, sharing stories of recovery and renewal. Maggie Harper moved through the crowd, making sure everyone felt welcome while Evelyn supervised the event staff with her characteristic attention to detail. Nicholas stepped onto the small platform at the front of the room, and a hush fell over the gathering. He looked different now, softer somehow. The sharp edges of his former self smoothed away by months of genuine care and purpose. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice warm and sincere. "Today we celebrate not just new beginnings, but the power of compassion and second chances." He gestured to Savannah's mural. "This beautiful artwork reminds us daily of the legacy of a man who, even in his darkest hours, never stopped thinking of others. James Walker, Savannah's father, taught us that true wealth lies not in our bank accounts, but in how we care for one another." The crowd nodded in agreement, many wiping away tears. Claire held Savannah close as Nicholas continued, describing the foundation's mission and the lives it had touched. When he mentioned specific families who had found hope through their programs, the room erupted in supportive applause. After the speeches, the gathering moved to the foundation's garden, where cherry trees bloomed in full splendor. Pink petals drifted on the spring breeze as Nicholas, Savannah, Claire, Evelyn, and Maggie settled onto a blanket spread beneath the largest tree. Savannah pulled out her sketchbook, her fingers already moving across the page with practiced confidence. She captured quick impressions: Nicholas's gentle smile, Claire's peaceful expression, Evelyn's elegant pose, and Maggie's motherly warmth. The scene before her was everything she had dreamed of during those cold nights on the street. A family, whole and healing. Laughter rang out as Evelyn shared a funny story about Nicholas's childhood, and Claire joined in with her own memories of happier days. Nicholas watched them all, his heart full of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. The cherry blossoms continued to fall, dusting their shoulders with nature's confetti, as Savannah's pencil moved swiftly across the paper, preserving this perfect moment of joy and belonging. If you enjoyed the story of Nicholas and Savannah, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.